Hello, welcome to episode 7 of Food for Your Mind. Today I'll be talking about The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers and the Homestyle Chicken Sandwich from Wendy's. I was getting sick of burgers, so I'm glad we have made it into the chicken sandwich universe. Basically, my take on the Homestyle chicken is it's the spicy chicken sandwich, only it's not spicy. I'm very, very hungry today though, so probably gonna make short work of this. As with the spicy chicken sandwich last week, it's a little bit stiff, could be a little bit tender. This isn't quite as good as I hoped. I didn't plan it this way, but the way it turned out, the hamburgers, I think were almost all dude writers. The chicken sandwiches are going to be almost all lady writers, as I believe they prefer to be called. Yes, that it was not as good as I thought it was going to be. I gave the spicy chicken sandwich a 9, because that's my go-to thing. I really, really like it. I think I'm gonna give this a 6. I'm gonna give it a 6. It wasn't bad. It wasn't even. It was better than average. But I was hoping for more out of the Homestyle chicken. Okay, now on to The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. First, some biographical information about Carson McCullers. She was born Lula Carson Smith in Columbus, Georgia in 1917. She's about 17, she goes to Juilliard, where she catches rheumatic fever and then has to return home for a period. She goes back to New York. She eventually gets married and moves to Charlotte, North Carolina. She gets divorced. She returns to New York City for a third time, where she basically lives, spending her time between there and Paris. She was apparently a frustrated lesbian, though she was married to a guy, and she was one of those people who, she was married to a guy, and they got divorced, and then they got remarried to one another. I can kind of understand getting divorced and then remarrying a different person, but to get divorced and then remarry the same person, this seems like a failure of logic somehow. During the period when Carson McCullers and her husband were divorced, he had a gay relationship with another man, and she was trying to pursue relationships with women, though I think remained an incel on that front. So that's a very curious case, that there were these two people who wound up together, and I think kind of both wanted to be with someone of the same gender. Carson McCullers attempted suicide, though she did not succeed. Her husband apparently attempted to entice her into joining him in a suicide pact at one point in their marriage. She did not do so, though he did succeed in committing suicide at that point. By 31, Carson McCullers was paralyzed on the entire left side of her body, and she eventually died of complications from alcoholism. So, a fairly tragic life on the whole. Now, when we're talking about Carson McCullers, obviously what we're talking about is Southern Gothic literature. Now, we got a bit of this last week with Flannery O'Connor, but I spent so much time talking about Flannery O'Connor's personal weirdness that I never actually described what Southern Gothic literature is. Well, before we can do that, I guess we have to back up and talk about what Gothic literature is, or what Gothic art is. Gothic art obviously comes from the Goths. They were a tribe in Europe in the days of the Roman Empire, and they're mostly remembered for their grotesque architecture with its gargoyles and things like that. Check out The Stones of Venice by one John Ruskin. He very adroitly describes the way in which you can see the kind of drunkenness and stupidity of these workmen as they've made these gargoyles, and how their own idiocy is now manifest in their artwork. It's very actually kind of interesting. So check that out, The Stones of Venice by John Ruskin. But as a literary movement, Gothic literature began in Germany with Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto. It then moved to England with the works of Anne Radcliffe and others, and then on into America and into the American South. I guess if you're looking to condense Southern Gothicism down into a word, that word is weird. The word is weird. There's all sort of, fading Southern belles. There could be sexual weirdness, could be sex with corpses or sex with animals or something like that. But there isn't really anything quite as extreme in this book. Is this just a less spicy Flannery O'Connor? Well, in a way it kind of is. I don't mean that in an entirely negative way, though. You know, they both write about kind of weirdos in the South, but in Flannery O'Connor's writing, these weirdos fail to connect, and these attempts at connection end in violence or chicanery or some other kind of devilment. By contrast, in Carson McCullers' work, the weirdos actually succeed, at least for a time to a degree, in connecting with one another. I'd like to talk just a bit about the characters that we meet in this novel. This novel's not really very strongly plotted, by the way, so if that's what you're looking for, maybe look elsewhere. First, you meet John Singer, who is described as a deaf mute in the novel, and he is kind of the hub of the novel, in the sense that all the other characters are people who are in the orbit of his life. He is not in a gay relationship, but just in a kind of almost a non-sexual man and wife type relationship with another deaf-mute man, a Greek man named Spiros Antonopoulos, and I'll read a bit describing their relationship in a minute. There's also a young girl named McKelly, who's obviously, I would say, a stand-in for Carson McCullers. Frank Zappa once said that writing about music is like dancing about architecture. So it is always very exciting when you see that done well. You hope that this is more than just a kind of latent class marker or something like that. There's also Jake Blunt, the drunken socialist. That's, of course, the best kind of socialist. He doesn't want that beer distributed equally to everybody, though. He wants that for himself. There's a local kind of barkeep named Biff Brannon, and he is interestingly kind of a maid freak. In terms of his identity politics, at least, there isn't really anything that freaky about him. It's just his interest in people like that. He's an honorary member of the team, and I think you can be an honorary member of the weirdo team, though there may be a price sometimes, and it won't really work if you do it facilely. You have to be sincere in your desire and interest in weirdness. And the last major character in the novel is Dr. Benedict Mady Copeland. He's an old black doctor who's very highly intellectual and always very frustrated with his family. He's always trying to get them to read books and, uplift the race. And they're like, hey man, we just want to drink and party and do stuff that regular people do. I felt a bit of sympathy for Dr. Copeland because I myself am often hectoring the people in my life that they should be reading more books, for example. And they're always just like, oh man, I'd just rather eat pizza. Anyway, probably a good time to read some of my favorite parts from this book. I did really like it, by the way. This book had a great beginning, so we're just going to start there. In the town, there were two mutes, and they were always together. Early every morning, they would come out from the house where they lived and walk arm in arm down the street to work. The two friends were very different. The one who always steered the way was an obese and dreamy Greek. In the summer, he would come out wearing a yellow or green polo shirt stuffed sloppily into his trousers in front and hanging loose behind. When it was colder, he wore over this a shapeless gray sweater. His face was round and oily, with half-closed eyelids and lips that curved into a gentle, stupid smile. The other mute was tall. His eyes had a quick, intelligent expression. He was immaculate and very soberly dressed. Here's a good bit of advice when you're choosing your relationships in life. And I don't even necessarily mean romantic relationships. This can be pretty important in friendships, too. Don't pick someone who's exactly like you, because you already have to be around you all day. So if you get another one like that, that can be too many. This is a passage describing these two mutes playing chess. Sometimes in the evening, the mutes would play chess. Singer had always greatly enjoyed this game, and years before he had tried to teach it to Antonopoulos. At first, his friend could not be interested in the reasons for moving the various pieces about on the board. Then Singer began to keep a bottle of something good under the table to be taken out after each lesson. The Greek never got on to the erratic movements of the knights and the sweeping mobility of the queens, but he learned to make a few set opening moves. He preferred the white pieces and would not play if the black men were given to him. After the first move, Singer worked out the game by himself while his friend looked on drowsily. If Singer made brilliant attacks on his own men so that in the end the black king was killed, Antonopoulos was always very proud and pleased. And you see, it's a humble but satisfactory little life they have together. Then, of course, something changes. Antonopoulos was not ill anymore, but a change had come in him. He was irritable and no longer content to spend the evenings quietly in their home. When he would wish to go out, Singer followed along close behind him. Antonopoulos would go into a restaurant, and while they sat at the table, he slyly put lumps of sugar or a pepper shaker or pieces of silverware in his pocket. Singer always paid for what he took, and there was no disturbance. At home, he scolded Antonopoulos, but the big Greek only looked at him with a bland smile. This is a description of drunken socialist Jake Blunt. Blunt was not a freak, although when you first saw him, he gave you that impression. It was like something was deformed about him, but when you looked at him closely, each part of him was normal and as it ought to be. Therefore, if this difference was not in the body, it was probably in the mind. He was like a man who had served a term in prison, or had been to Harvard College, or had lived for a long time with foreigners in South America. He was like a person who had been somewhere that other people are not likely to go, or had done something that others are not apt to do. And that is what connects all these characters, is that their unusualness. And also, I think the novel makes the claim that all different species of unusualness are, in fact, different species of the same thing. And the people who are strange, in whatever way they are strange, are more like other strange people than they are like normal people. Here's the description of Dr. Copeland. He sat motionless in this position for a long time. Even his eyes, which stared from behind the silver rims of his spectacles, did not change their fixed, somber gaze. Then he cleared his throat harshly and picked up a book from the floor beside his chair. All around him the room was very dark, and he had to hold the book close to the stove to make out the print. Tonight he read Spinoza. He did not wholly understand the intricate play of ideas and the complex phrases, but as he read, he sensed a strong, true purpose behind the words, and he felt that he almost understood. Again, just as I was saying about Mick Kelly and the classical music, you feel that this is more than a class marker, because the truth is, most doctors and lawyers, the ones that I know, and I know a few, they don't go home and read Spinoza after they get done with work. They go home and watch TV, if that. This is a conversation the doctor has with his daughter a few pages later. Portia opened a paper sack that she had placed on the kitchen table. I done brought a nice mess of collard greens, and I thought maybe we'd have supper together. I done brought a piece of side meat, too. These here collard greens need to be seasoned with that. You don't care if the collard greens is cooked in meat, do you? It does not matter. You still don't eat their meat? No. For purely private reasons, I'm a vegetarian. But it does not matter if you wish to cook the collards with a piece of meat. This is an interesting little point in that he rejects the culture, or almost all of the culture that he's been born into. And yet, there are some things like the food, which even though maybe it's not exactly what he wants, he still tolerates. I guess it's because that is what he has always eaten. And I guess he recognizes that that's always been fine before, and so it'll be fine now. Here's the music part that I mentioned before. This is Mick Kelly speaking. This is a description of her interior monologue, I guess. By the way, she's sitting outside someone else's house listening to the radio, because her family does not have a radio. One program came on after another, and all of them were punk. She didn't especially care. She smoked and picked a little bunch of grass blades. After a while, a new announcer started talking. He mentioned Beethoven. She had read in the library about that musician. His name was pronounced with an A and spelled with a double E. He was a German fellow like Mozart. When he was living, he spoke in a foreign language and lived in a foreign place, like she wanted to do. The announcer said they were going to play his third symphony. She only halfway listened because she wanted to walk some more, and she didn't much care what they played. Then the music started. Mick raised her head, and her fist went up to her throat. This music did not take a long time or a short time. It did not have anything to do with time going by at all. She sat with her arms held tight around her legs, biting her salty knee very hard. It might have been 5 minutes she listened, or half the night. The second part was black-colored, a slow march. Not sad, but like the whole world was dead and black, and there was no use thinking back how it was before. One of those horn kind of instruments played a sad and silver tune. Then the music rose up angry and with excitement underneath, and finally the black march again. So, in sum, this is a less spicy Flannery O'Connor. I didn't like it quite as much as I did her. I gave her a 9, gonna give this one an 8. See you next week for more Food for Your Mind.